The barrel was glowing, not warm, not hot, the kind of red-orange shimmer you see on a forge, except this was a Browning automatic rifle, and the man holding it was leaning out a third-floor window of a stone storehouse in the hills above the Italian coast, and below him dozens of German soldiers in gray-green uniforms were pushing through the smoke. He didn't step back. He grabbed a second rifle off the floor. The man beside him had been killed at that window minutes earlier, and he kept firing. When that one locked up too, he didn't panic. He looked around the room, spotted a stack of 60mm mortar shells in the corner, and walked over to them with the same steady, deliberate calm he'd had since the night before. He pulled the safety pin on one, rammed the nose against the windowsill to arm it, and threw it down into the street like a baseball. The explosion shook the walls. He picked up another one. His name was Charles E. Kelly. He was 22 years old. He was a corporal from the roughest alley in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And by the time the sun came up that September morning in 1943, he would have held off a German assault almost entirely on his own, using every weapon he could find, and when those ran out, improvising weapons that no one had tried before. This is the story of how a street kid with nothing to lose became the first soldier in the European theater of World War II to earn the Medal of Honor. To understand what happened in that storehouse, you have to understand where Charles Kelly came from. He was born on September 23, 1920, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but not the Pittsburgh of riverboats and Carnegie Hall. Kelly grew up in a wooden building at the end of an alley, in a neighborhood reporters would later call a decrepit shack. No running water, no electricity, no toilet. He was one of 9 children, and all 9 of them shared a bunk room in the attic. He dropped out of school young and ran with a street gang. He got in trouble with the law. He knew how to fight. He knew how to take a hit and keep moving. Those weren't virtues anyone celebrated back then, but they were exactly the skills that would save his life and the lives of his comrades on the slopes above Salerno. He enlisted in the Army in Pittsburgh in May 1942. When the recruiters looked at his record, they probably wondered what they were getting. What they got was someone who seemed almost incapable of fear. During basic training, Kelly made his sergeant's hair turn white. He would unscrew the cap of a hand grenade just to see how it worked. He would pull the fuse from a 60mm mortar shell and shake it next to his ear. "Does anything rattle?" "God, Kelly," one sergeant shouted, "do you want to blow us all up?" He tried to volunteer for the paratroopers, the toughest outfit in the Army, and nearly made it through. But a visit to a base hospital, where he saw airborne trainees with broken backs, broken arms, and shattered legs, changed his mind. He went AWOL for a stretch, got in trouble again, but eventually came back. Some of his friends said it was because they'd called him not tough enough. That phrase appeared to bother Charles Kelly more than incoming artillery fire ever would. He was assigned to Company L, 3rd Battalion, 143rd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division, the Texas National Guard, the T-Patchers, they were called, for the T-shaped arrowhead on their shoulder patch. It was a division that had trained hard in North Africa and was about to face the fight of its life. September 9, 1943, 4 days before Kelly's stand. The 36th Division hit the beaches at Paestum in the dark hours before dawn, part of Operation Avalanche, the Allied amphibious assault on the Italian mainland near the port city of Salerno. The plan was ambitious: land the Fifth Army, punch through German defenses, and drive north toward Naples. The planners thought they might reach the hills surrounding the beachhead by the end of the first day. The Germans had other ideas. As the first landing craft approached the shore, an American voice came over a loudspeaker in German-held territory. "Come on in and give up. We have you covered." The Allies had lost the element of surprise before the first boot hit the sand. By 7 in the morning, German tanks from the 16th Panzer Division were already rolling toward the water. Panzer IVs, 25 tons of steel with a 75mm cannon, pushing through the smoke and confusion of a beachhead that had barely had time to form. The Americans fought back with every anti-tank gun and artillery piece they had. It took until afternoon to stop the first major armored assault. The next 2 days were a brutal seesaw. The Americans and British clawed inland, seized high ground, then lost it again. The town of Altavilla, a small hillside village about 10 miles from the coast, perched on terraced vineyards that commanded the entire valley below, changed hands multiple times. The Germans understood what that high ground meant. From Altavilla, they could observe almost every American movement in the sector. They were not giving it up easily. By September 12th, 2 days before Kelly's stand, the Germans had fully retaken Altavilla and Hill 424 nearby. The 36th Division had been savaged. 3 battalions had taken punishing casualties trying to hold that ground, and the German commander on the ground, General Heinrich von Wiedinghoff, was massing for a decisive blow. He believed the Allies were on the verge of retreating to the sea. He wasn't entirely wrong. Allied commanders were drafting contingency plans to re-embark entire corps back onto ships. Into this nightmare, Corporal Charles Kelly volunteered, again and again and again. The date would become known to veterans of the 36th Division as Black Monday. At dawn on September 13th, 3 battalions from the 36th pushed out once more toward Altavilla and Hill 424. The mission was desperate. They had to retake that high ground, or the entire beachhead might collapse. Artillery rained down from German positions above. Snipers worked the approaches. Mortars walked down the roads. Corporal Kelly joined the advance as part of Company L. His first volunteer act of the day was to join a small patrol tasked with finding and neutralizing German machine gun nests that had pinned down the battalion's movement. They crawled through terraced vineyard rows, moving below the German sight lines, listening for the telltale chatter of an MG-42, the German machine gun that fired at 1,200 rounds per minute, a tearing sound like cloth being ripped at high speed. They found 2 nests. Kelly and the patrol cleared them, moving fast, flanking and firing, eliminating the crews before they could reorient. But that wasn't enough. Word came that an American battalion was supposed to be positioned on Hill 315, roughly a mile away through ground swept by German observation posts, snipers, and artillery. Somebody needed to make the trip, to find out if they were still there, still holding, and what they'd found. Kelly volunteered. He moved out alone, crossing nearly 2 miles of open ground under constant enemy observation, moving through sniper fire and mortar bursts, stopping and going, crawling when he had to, running when he could. He reached Hill 315 and found it occupied, but not by Americans. The Germans had taken it. He gathered that information, turned around, and made the trip back through the same fire. When he returned and reported, commanders immediately sent him on a 3rd patrol, this time back into the fight, helping to destroy 2 more enemy machine gun nests. By now, he had burned through most of his bar ammunition. The Browning automatic rifle was the backbone of American infantry firepower, an 18-pound weapon that fired the same 30-06 Springfield round as the M1 Garand, from a 20-round box magazine, at roughly 500 rounds per minute. In experienced hands, it could suppress a machine gun crew, cover an advance, or hold a defensive position long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Kelly's hands were experienced. He fired until his weapon ran dry. Then he secured permission to go to a forward ammunition dump to reload. He had no idea what he was walking into. The ammunition dump was located near a stone storehouse on the extreme left flank of the regiment's position. Exposed, isolated, exactly the kind of place German counterattacks tend to find first. By the time Kelly arrived, the Germans were already attacking ferociously. He grabbed his ammunition. He could have left. His resupply mission was complete, and the position was not his assigned post. Instead, when his commanders saw what was happening, they assigned Kelly a new mission: protect the rear of the storehouse. He accepted. The night of September 13th passed in smoke and darkness. Kelly held his position at the back of the building while German infantry probed the perimeter. Every time a shadow moved wrong, every time a footstep crunched in the wrong place, he was ready. Through the long hours before dawn, he kept the rear of that building sealed. His comrades tried to hold the other positions, but the German pressure was relentless, and by morning, most of the machine gunners who had been assigned to the windows were dead or wounded. One by one, the men at the posts fell. When the sun came up on September 14th, the Germans came again. Kelly moved to an open third-floor window, the same window where a machine gunner had been killed minutes before. He braced his bar against the sill. Below him, German infantry in gray-green uniforms moved through the narrow streets and cobblestone square of Altavilla. Some were scrambling up toward the building. Some were firing upward at the windows. The air around Kelly was full of incoming rounds. He didn't move back from the window. The bar fired in controlled bursts. Kelly walked the fire across the German positions below, hitting targets as they appeared, suppressing movement, making the square below a killing ground. The weapon's .30 caliber rounds punched through light cover, through doorways, through the spaces between parked vehicles. He fired until the barrel glowed. The Browning automatic rifle is a robust weapon, but no gun is made to fire indefinitely. The barrel heated, expanded, warped. Rounds stopped cycling reliably. The weapon locked. Kelly set it down, picked up a second bar from a fallen comrade, and kept firing. When that one locked up too, both barrels too warped from sustained fire to be trusted, he moved from window to window, grabbing every other weapon in reach. A Thompson submachine gun, an M1 Garand, a Springfield bolt-action, an M1 carbine. Each one found its way into his hands, was fired until empty or jammed, then traded for the next. One account notes he also fired a .30 caliber machine gun from another position and used a rocket launcher to engage targets below, firing it from the window as the battle reached its most desperate point. The Germans were still coming. The ammunition was running out. No grenades were left in the building. The Germans were tightening their grip on the square below. Kelly looked around the room. On the third floor, he found a cache of 60mm mortar rounds, the standard ammunition for the M2 60mm mortar, the American infantry's closest range indirect fire weapon. A 60mm round weighs about 3 pounds. It's a finned projectile, roughly the length of a man's forearm, with a fuse on the nose designed to detonate on impact. Under normal circumstances, the fuse is armed by the impulse of being fired from a mortar tube, a sharp mechanical acceleration that cocks the detonator. The safety pin prevents the fuse from arming prematurely. Kelly knew this. He had studied it obsessively back in basic training, taking the rounds apart, shaking them, asking how they worked while sergeants nearly had cardiac arrests. He pulled the safety pin on the first round. Then, instead of a mortar tube, he rammed the base of the round firmly against the window frame, simulating the impact that would arm the fuse. Now he was holding what amounted to a live grenade the size of a small bottle. He leaned out the window and threw it nose first toward the Germans below. The explosion rattled the building. He picked up another one, and another. He threw approximately 6 of them into the street and the square below, each one landing nose first as he intended, each one detonating among the German soldiers pushing toward the building. The blasts were large enough that other GIs in the building thought they were receiving incoming artillery. At least 5 Germans died in those detonations. The assault on the storehouse faltered. The order came, evacuate the building. Kelly's sergeant ordered him out. Kelly argued. He wanted to stay behind to cover the withdrawal, to hold the position alone while his comrades made their way back to American lines. Despite the sergeant's repeated orders to leave, Kelly refused until the rest of the men were clear. He held the building alone, firing the rocket launcher from the window, holding the door. When the last of his comrades were safely away, he lowered himself from the building and made his way back through the German lines. He reached his own unit. He had left more than 200 German dead behind him, or so the accounts said. Whether that number was precise or an estimate in the fog of war, what remained certain was this. A corporal from an alley in Pittsburgh had, through an extraordinary act of will and improvisation, held off a German assault that had broken multiple battalions over the previous 3 days. It was the Stars and Stripes, the Army's own newspaper, that named him. An article about the stand at Altavilla appeared shortly after the battle. The reporter, trying to capture what Kelly had done in a single phrase, called him Commando Kelly. The name stuck to him for the rest of his life, whether he wanted it to or not. On February 18, 1944, General Mark W. Clark, commander of the Fifth Army, the same general who had nearly ordered his entire force back onto ships during the worst moments at Salerno, pinned the Medal of Honor onto Charles Kelly's chest. The citation read, in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, Corporal Kelly's fighting determination and intrepidity in battle exemplify the highest traditions of the U.S. Armed Forces." 4 days after the ceremony, Kelly stuffed the medal in his pocket and went back into combat. He would fight in several more major engagements, including the devastating attempt by the 36th Division to cross the Rapido River in early 1944, one of the costliest single operations of the Italian campaign, where American forces took catastrophic losses in hours. Kelly survived. He also earned 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, a Combat Infantryman Badge, and military decorations from both Britain and France, 11 awards for valor in total. He was officially one of the most decorated American soldiers in the European theater. He was also, as he himself would have told you, still just a kid from the alley. The Army sent him back to the United States in April 1944, and the celebrations began. He was given a parade on Pittsburgh's North Side, the keys to the city. His old neighborhood, Shawano Street, the same alley he'd grown up in, filled with people who had watched him run with a street gang and now watched him walk past in a uniform covered with ribbons. He earned $40,000 for a book about his experiences, One Man's War, which was excerpted in the Saturday Evening Post and later adapted into a film. He toured the country with other infantrymen as part of the Army's Here's Your Infantry demonstration tour, showing Bond rallies across America what the fighting men in Italy actually looked like. He received an honorable discharge in 1945 with the rank of Technical Sergeant. And then the war ended, and the cheering stopped. This is the part of the story that the ticker tape parades don't tell. Charles Kelly came home and tried to make a life. He opened a service station on the north side of Pittsburgh in 1946. It struggled. A robbery and a downturn forced him to sell it in 1947. His wife, May, was diagnosed with uterine cancer that same year. The radiation treatments were long and expensive. Kelly used everything he had to pay for her care. She died in 1951. The cost of those treatments eventually resulted in Kelly losing his home to foreclosure. Reporters found him years later, living in hard circumstances, struggling to provide for his children. The Stars and Stripes had once called him Commando Kelly. Now newspaper stories were asking why America's great hero was giving his kids cereal in the morning and sometimes not having enough cereal. "These medals will just be a lot of brass after the war," Kelly had said when reporters first came to celebrate him, back in 1944, "and I'll just be another ex-soldier." He was right. He had always been more clear-eyed about what awaited him than the crowds who cheered him were. Donations came in when the news broke. Money, furniture, clothing, over 100 job offers. He took one in St. Louis, working as a buyer for a scrap iron company. His new employer arranged for an 8-bedroom house for his family, valued at $25,000. Kelly quit before the family moved in. He drifted through different jobs, different cities, different circumstances. The press ran stories on him periodically, as it does with heroes when their struggles become newsworthy. He never complained publicly. He had seen things that made domestic hardship difficult to dramatize. He signed a waiver in 1950 so his younger brother Danny, not yet old enough to enlist, could join the Army. He had given his brother the Army the same way he had volunteered for every patrol, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because the alternative was to do nothing. In later years, he received some stability. He worked various jobs. The government eventually named a support facility in his honor, the Charles E. Kelly Support Facility in Oakdale, Pennsylvania, originally designated the Oakdale Army Support Element, was renamed for him in 1987. In 2024, the city of Pittsburgh dedicated the street where he had grown up, Shawano Street, as honorary Commando Kelly Way. He died on January 11, 1985, at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Pittsburgh. He was 64 years old. His cause of death was listed as complications following bowel surgery and a heart attack. About 150 relatives and veterans came to pay their respects at a funeral home on the north side. They followed his flag-draped coffin to Highwood Cemetery on a snowy hillside a few miles away. White-helmeted riflemen fired an 18-gun salute. The colors were folded and presented to his daughter. A bugler played taps. An old friend, Leonard Funk, another Medal of Honor recipient from nearby Braddock Hills, Pennsylvania, had known Kelly since 1945. He recalled that the two of them rarely talked about the war. "We know what it is," Funk said. "We discuss other things than combat." You may be wondering, at this point, what drove Charles Kelly to do what he did. Not in the tactical sense. We've covered the tactics. But in the human sense. What makes a man stay at a window when the last soldier beside him is dead? What makes him reach for a mortar round when the guns run dry? There are easier questions, and there are harder ones. Kelly himself, when pressed in interviews, rarely gave the answers people expected. He didn't speak of glory. He didn't invoke patriotism in soaring terms. He spoke, when he spoke at all, about the men around him. "I did it for my buddies," he said more than once. Plainly, without elaboration. That phrase, simple as it sounds, is the answer that has come from soldiers in every war in every country for as long as wars have existed. It is the answer that military historians have confirmed across thousands of after-action reports and Medal of Honor citations and oral histories. When men do extraordinary things in combat, they almost never say it was for a flag or an ideology. They say it was for the person next to them. Charles Kelly had grown up in an alley with no electricity and no running water, and he had learned from that experience that the only thing that really mattered was whether the person next to you could count on you. In the Army, he finally had a use for everything he was. He was too aggressive, too reckless, too curious about things that could blow up. But those were precisely the traits that let him clear 2 machine gun nests in a morning, crawl 2 miles through artillery fire to gather intelligence, and stand at a window throwing mortar shells while his sergeant begged him to leave. He wasn't fearless. He was afraid of the right things and not afraid of the things most men fear. The Battle of Salerno came within hours of becoming a catastrophe. If the German counterattack on September 13th had broken through to the beach, and it came dangerously close, the entire Operation Avalanche might have been thrown back into the Mediterranean. The subsequent Allied campaign up the Italian peninsula, the opening of a second European front, the gradual strangling of German resources, all of it was built on the foundation of that beachhead being held. It was held by many men, on many positions. But on the extreme left flank of the 143rd Regiment, at an isolated storehouse near an ammunition dump on a September morning in 1943, it was held, for a critical stretch of hours, by one corporal from Pittsburgh. The medal they gave him in February 1944 weighed less than a pound. He stuffed it in his pocket 4 days later and went back to war. That is what Commando Kelly was. If you've stayed with this story to the end, you already know why these men deserve to be remembered. Not because war is glorious, it isn't, but because in the worst moments, ordinary men from ordinary places did extraordinary things, not for medals, not for headlines, but for the person beside them. There are thousands of stories like this. Forgotten stories. Stories that shape the world you live in, told by men who came home and asked for almost nothing in return. If you want to keep these stories alive, if you want to honor people like Charles E. Commando Kelly, the best thing you can do is subscribe to this channel. Every video we make is a promise to give these men the attention they earned. Hit the bell. Share this with someone who loves history. Let the record show that we did not forget.